Hi, I'm Mike Conlon, your host of the Weiser Books Radio Hour. Today we are joined by Shaheen Miro and Theresa Reed, favorite Weiser authors. Theresa Reed is author of Astrology for Real Life and Tarot No Questions Asked, which was recently released and subject of a recent Weiser Books Radio Hour. Shaheen Miro is author and artist for the Lunar Nomad Oracle and Lunar Alchemy. Together, they both wrote the book Tarot for Troubled Times, which was released within the past couple of years or so. And today we're talking about their new release, The Uncommon Tarot. Welcome to the show, guys.
Hi, thank you for having us.
Well, yeah, we're glad to be here. Thank you
Yeah,
for having us.
happy to have you both. It's always fun to have more than one author. I know I've interviewed you both separately and together for Tarot for Troubled Times. So welcome back to the show.
Thank you.
All right, so the uncommon tarot, we're billing this as something that's very uncommon. That's what the title is. So tell me, what distinguishes this tarot from other decks? What influences does it have, and why should people pick this up, assuming they've got a few other decks?
Oh, all the big
All the
questions.
big questions all at once.
Yeah. So I created the Uncommon Tarot because I wanted to really reimagine the tarot system as a whole. And so what I wanted to really capture was the elements of tarot from a traditional standpoint that people, know and understand. But I wanted to really give kind of a new life to the images so that they were more diverse and more inclusive. And in a way, I really wanted people to be able to find their own story in the images. Like I love every tarot deck, I feel like, because I just love artwork and visuals. And I love the Rider Waite Smith deck as a basis for people to learn. I think there's a lot of really wonderful symbolism there, and a lot of great structure. But I also feel like at times it can be off-putting for people because they don't see themselves in it. It feels very one-sided, I guess. The Rider Waite Smith, and so the Uncommon Tarot was really meant to capture all the different sides of life.
Got it. And Teresa, can you tell me a little bit about your contribution to the deck? We know Shaheen's artwork. What did you contribute to creating the deck?
Well, Shaheen is the visionary, the genius behind all that incredible art. And one of the things, first of all, I want to say before I talk about my contribution is Shaheen is totally right that a lot of, I mean, I work with the Rider Waite Smith deck, but it can be off putting when people do not find themselves in the deck. They feel like they're being excluded. And I think a lot of people now are really demanding that we have decks that represent everybody. And I think that's brilliant. I also think the art in this deck is so evocative. There's so much symbolism that's really rich. It adds layer upon layer around the traditional Rider Waite Smith deck. So it's very good for interpretation. And my contribution is I helped to write the little white book that came with it. So I collaborated with Shaheen on that part. Shaheen and I love to write together. Yep.
Yeah.
And, shared some of my insights and some of the things that I was feeling when I looked at those cards. So, that's my contribution to it. So I'm kind of in the background doing a little help.
Fantastic. Go
And
ahead.
I want to say that something that I really love about working with you, Teresa, and especially on this, is that when I'm creating something visual, especially with a tarot deck, I mean, there is symbolism there and there is a lot of thought and intention that goes into it. But at the same time, like you don't know how someone's going to interpret your
Right.
creation and what they see in it. And so it was really interesting to really get your reaction to the images and what you saw and how you conveyed the traditional meanings and the meanings of that particular card that I created. And it kind of helped me clarify some pieces as well. So I love that process.
I love the process too, because I also think, for an artist, this is just my opinion, who makes a tarot deck, having someone else help to write the book, it does give, we see things, writers see things differently than the artist. I mean, when I'm creating any kind of art, my art's terrible, by the way, don't ask to see it. But, when you're creating art, and I live with my husband's an artist, they're seeing it one way. And I will sometimes look at something he's doing and I'm like, oh my God, I see this other symbolism here that the artist might not even subconsciously or consciously, I don't know, notice. And so we also, as writers, we're able to bring something else into it. And then together, I mean, I just think it's really a beautiful marriage.
Yeah, same. And yeah, I think together you really clarify that message. I always think of, even as a writer, like you can't read between your own lines. You know
Mm,
what I mean? So somebody else, when they are interpreting your work or when they're reacting to it, you get this whole other side of things. And I think that makes the symbolism and the meaning of it so much richer. So I find that even with the Uncommon Tarot and with the Lunar Nomad Oracle, I have people who contact me all the time and they'll say, why did you use this image, or did you do this on purpose? And it'll be like, I didn't actually do that on purpose, but somehow that all came together. They take on a life of their own, the images do.
When people ask you if you did it on purpose, the answer is yes.
Yes.
Of course I did. I totally meant that.
Well, for me, artwork is very intuitive. And so when I'm creating any kind of image, whether it's a tarot image or whatever, I approach it in the same way as kind of doing a reading, where I'm just,
mhm.
I feel the essence, the energy, the spirit of whatever that card or that image is going to be, and then it just starts to kind of come together. The pieces start to kind of, they don't place themselves, but I feel like I'm the one interpreting them. So there is a part of it for me where I feel like I'm channeling it almost.
That's so interesting that you say that, because when I write in a stream of consciousness. The same like when I do tarot readings. It's always
Hmm.
in a stream of consciousness. So when I'm writing, I'm sitting down and I am like letting it out. And then of course I always have to go back and I look at it. And sometimes I go back and look at it, I'm like, what the hell did you just say? Oh my God, fix this. And other times I'm like, oh my God, that came out of you. That's pretty interesting. Let's play with
Hmm.
this. So I do the same thing. It never comes out where I'm like deliberately, well, this is what this card means. It's always like, like a musician playing a drum. And then you come
Yeah.
back and you look at it and it's like, now what do we do with this?
Yes, there's a rhythm to creating. And I find even for myself when I'm writing or I'm creating visual art as well, sometimes I'm like doing things that I know I'm gonna scrap because I
Yes.
because it's like I gotta just get in that frame of mind and that process. And I kind of equate that to, doing like a daily card pull or something, staying really fluent with what you're doing. But yeah, that's definitely how I create images as well.
That's so interesting too, because Julia Cameron wrote the book The Artist Way, and she says every morning you should get up and you write 3 pages to get stuff out of your head. And
Mm.
every morning when I'm doing the card of the day, first of all, that also I do that in a stream of consciousness, but it is also a way to clear the channels so I can get to my other writing duties. So I
Yes,
totally feel you on that.
yes, I love that. I love that.
So, regarding the collaborative aspect, when Theresa, you took a look at the cards and started writing, and Shaheen, you saw what Theresa was writing about the cards. You're both coming from a common tarot background as both readers and kind of leaning on the Rider-Waite-Smith tarot as kind of the basis. But were there surprises and specific cards with what Theresa wrote about them? Theresa, were there surprises in what you saw in how Shaheen illustrated them? And specifically, did either of you change, Theresa, what you wrote, or Shaheen, what you illustrated based on the feedback from the other?
Well, the way that we really worked on it was Teresa and I sat down and talked about kind of what the spirit of the deck was about. And I think Teresa, you asked me like what was like my song for the deck,
Yep.
like really wanting to get in the headspace that I was in as the creator, which I love because for me, when I'm creating anything, it is like a little world. I have my songs I'm listening to, have my favorite shoes I'm wearing when I'm doing it, like those kind of things. um, so that was one of the first things that we really did was we like sat down and we talked about, like what are the things that I feel like kind of support the vision and the artwork itself. And then Teresa, you know, in her own time kind of sat down and wrote out her interpretations of the cards. And then I looked at them And really, I mean, everything Theresa had shared and had written was beautiful. I reworked a couple of
Yep.
things, and really it was based on not even changing what my interpretation or my understanding of it was, but really kind of trying to capture even more, some of the symbolism in the images or the continuity of how the whole image came together. But really, I think we were very much in agreement. And as far as like the actual images go, no, there wasn't anything I needed to change in the artwork. The one thing that does stand out to me that was sort of that just kind of like came to me was when I changed the temperance to the alchemist.
Mhm.
And that was like something that I had thought about the whole time, but I hadn't done. And then, I think I even asked you, Teresa, like, do you feel like this is something that makes sense for what you had written? And it did, it just worked. And actually, that's one of the cards in the deck of the Uncommon Tarot that a lot of people comment on. And they
Mhm.
love that it's called the Alchemist. So I was glad that I went in that direction. But, it really was a very smooth process from my end of things. I don't know about you, Teresa.
It was smooth. Well, first of all, Shaheen and I, because we've worked together, we've taught together, we worked together in our previous book, Tarot for Troubled Times. So we also had a feel for how each other works.
Hmm.
And when I'm working with somebody who's doing the artistic end, it's always important. And I think this is something for writers who work with tarot deck creators to think about. You have to interview the artist. You have to interview them. You have to get into their head and really feel what their intentions are, their process. And that's why I even ask things like, what is the theme song for this deck? By the way, I have a theme song for every book I write. I never reveal it to anybody, but I have it. And this is going to sound weird. It's very magical for me. It's part of my process. And so there's a theme song for every single book, and it helps to inspire me for the spirit of the book. And then if I'm out running my day-to-day things and I hear that song coming on out of the blue, I always know it's kind of like my guide saying, you're on the right track. You're on the right track.
Right.
And I purposely pick songs that aren't necessarily going to be on the radio all the time. So that way it really works as an omen. So we had a theme song for the deck, and that really also, I would listen to that song before I know this sounds crazy, but Shaheen gets it. I would listen to the song that we picked for the deck and the songs that reminded me of Shaheen before I began writing. And that would like, boom, I would be in it. I can do it now. And I'm looking at the images. I'm feeling that music. I'm feeling his spirit, his intention. And that would allow me to really tap in so that the deck is going to be true, not just to the Rider Waite Smith images, but true to the spirit of Shaheen and his beautiful vision. And by the way, I when he came back with his ideas for, well, let's add this and this into the writing and just change this around, I was like, of course, that makes sense. So there was no like, oh my God, what are you doing? It was like, yes, this is really coming into that groove. We're coming together. We're doing a tango, and the
Mhm.
music is beautiful when you work with someone like that. But you got to start with the music.
All right,
Hmm.
so I'm not going to ask what the theme song of the deck was, but Shaheen, you mentioned playing various and sundry songs during the creation of this. I would encourage you to come up with an Uncommon Tarot playlist.
Oh, yes,
Yeah,
I could do that.
just throwing that out there. I don't think it's anything we can get away with actually publishing or anything like that, but
Yeah.
that might be fun. Uh, all right, so let's see, specific to some images, I've got some people in my life who, I make a deck and I bring home this thing and I say, look at this pretty object I made. And they get into it and say, oh my God, what is going on with this, that, or the other thing? And, it's like, well, I don't know. I mean,
Yeah.
I can tell you traditionally what it is and what's going on, but I I'm the production guy. I put stuff out in the world. It's the editorial people who are asking questions. It's the design people. In this particular case, I think it was Catherine that y'all were working with,
Mhm.
who make sure that things look great and actually really do put some thought into the color adjustments and making sure that these things look really great. Um, but specifically, I'm asking about the Nine of Wands, and Shaheen, if you could just kind of maybe walk us through the Nine of Wands as an example of how you adapted the Rider-Waite-Smith deck into something new and different.
Yeah. Okay. So, show me the Nine of Wands. You have it with you.
I do. It's
I
just got
wanna.
right here.
I want to make sure I can talk about it. Yeah. So with this image, the way that I always look at this image in particular is, um, first of all, when you think about a card, you have obviously the background, the foreground, the middle ground, and so there's these three layers that you're looking at. And with this card in particular, I think of that middle layer of those wands as almost like, um, a cage in a sense, like they're bars. And so this person has this wall between them and the outside world. And I think in a lot of ways, like looking at this image, and connected to the Rider-Waite-Smith deck, I mean, there's a central figure standing there kind of in this defensive mode. And so this card in particular is not, as far as like what's the word I'm looking for? Like the structure of it is very similar to the Rider-Waite-Smith, but what I wanted to really capture in it that was different, was the colors. Using the red, using the element of fire,
Mhm.
and also trying to create that distinction that something is happening in the background on the other side of those wands. So if you look closely, you'll see there are, birds actually flying behind him. And to me, there's this feeling here of kind of locking yourself away, or standing on the other side of something but not engaging with it. And that's what I wanted to capture with that. And the other thing that for me in a lot of the images you'll see is I kind of wove in different cultures and ethnicities. And for me, a lot of that has to do with like my own exposure and my own background and things that I'm connected to. But I also, at the same time, never want my personal interpretation or understanding of an image to dictate the meaning of the image for somebody else, if that makes sense.
Absolutely. Well, thanks
Yeah.
for that. And Elizabeth, thanks you as well. Um, let's see. You mentioned that one thing when you're looking through the deck that's unavoidable is just how diverse it is. You've got, people of different complexion, people of different genders, people of different, obviously different sexuality. Um, I mean, I understand why that is, but yeah, I'm gonna argue as a traditionalist here. So when you're talking about the Waite Smith deck, um, you're saying that people aren't particularly seeing themselves in the deck, but where the deck is basically representational or metaphorical to begin with. How big a problem is that, and why, beyond kind of a marketing sense, would you switch that up?
Well, I mean, I don't want to make like a blanket statement as far as how big of a problem that is or what that looks like for everybody, because I think that different people are going to have different relationships and understandings of the cards and how they feel represented or not. Like for me, for example, and I'm sure Teresa, because you work with the Rider-Waite-Smith a lot, you feel this way. When I look at those images, they almost feel like placeholders to me. So like I can superimpose upon them whatever whoever I'm reading for, or whatever it is that I'm reading about. I mean, I can be really fluid in that way. But a lot of times when you work with people, and when I work with people in person, they'll see a card, and some, like for example, if we have a card that is a male figure, and there's someone who identifies as female that you're working with, and you're saying, well, here's the King of Swords, some people get really like, I'm the King of Swords. And so I didn't go the route of, changing, kings and queens to something else. I wanted to kind of hold true to some of those traditional things, but I also wanted people to see that there's a very diverse way of looking at the tarot symbolism as a whole. And it's not to say that my interpretation of this one card is the right interpretation of it. It's to say that there are a diverse way, I can't talk, a diverse way of looking at that image and seeing it and interpreting it and understanding it. And so that's what I wanted to do, is really show that in each image.
So, Theresa, I know that you're out in the world as the tarot lady, and I know that we've spoken about this in the past. You've heard about people, and I mean, honestly, we've heard from a sales perspective, we need more diversity in what we publish, and obviously, this deck is probably as diverse as it gets. Can you speak to that a little bit?
Sure. I know that, I mean, I've been reading tarot now for a long time, and I've been reading professionally for 30 years. And, at first when I began my career, you didn't really think about anything except the Rider-Waite Smith. But I've learned over the years that you have to look at even that deck very differently, because we are living in a very different world now, 40 years later. And I really appreciate how people have spoken up and said, listen, we need more representation. And one of the things that I've noticed in our field, now back in the day, now here's where I could say back in the day, the only readers I knew were really a bunch of white women. I didn't even know I didn't know a lot of male readers. But thanks to the internet, thanks to us all being connected, I mean, tarot has exploded in popularity. And now what we're seeing is, oh my God, the field has changed. It has changed a lot. And I mean, more people are getting access to tarot. And also, the tarot field is very colorful, it's extremely diverse. And so, the readers themselves want diverse decks. They don't want to be just looking at the Rider Waite Smith deck, because we don't have the same field that we had 40 years ago, 30 years ago.
Yeah.
It's very different. And I love that. I think it's great. Now, I still work with the Rider Waite Smith deck, but here's how I've changed as a reader. I mean, back in the day, there weren't very many books, and the books that were there were very much from a cisgendered, heteronormative, white world. And they were written from that perspective. And, so you would see like the Queen of Cups. Well, this is a blonde lady with blue eyes. I don't even look at that like that any longer. First of all, when I do readings for people, I want to know their preferred pronouns out of respect. And then when I'm looking at the cards, I'm never looking at it like, well, this is definitely a woman, this is definitely a dude. I'm looking at the energy. And so when I look at the energy, the Queen of Cups is no longer blonde-haired, blue-eyed woman who's super emotional. Instead, this is a person. And if it represents a person in your life, it's somebody who's really sensitive, they're very emotional. If this is you, the card is then saying, this is a time in your life where you are more in touch with your feelings. So everything has changed in the way a lot of readers read, even the ones who read the Rider-Waite Smith deck. And the field has changed dramatically. So from a marketing standpoint, it's not just our audience that is diverse anymore. It is the people who are reading those cards. And some of the readers now that are very popular, that are just slaying it, are like Tatiana Tarot. We've got V from Red Light Readings. We've got people like up and comers like Vita Lumen, Whitney Bowen Adams, who's doing amazing things out there. And they are flipping the table. They are changing the game. And they're not going to settle just for the Rider-Waite Smith deck. And why should they?
Yeah.
Why should they? I mean, so from a marketing standpoint, we have to not just consider the audience that wants this deck. We also have to consider the whole field is changing, and readers want also decks that represent them and their clientele, and that they feel good having in their hands. I mean, I look at deck creators too, like Courtney, who did the. Was that your phone, Shane?
Yeah,
Who
sorry.
did the Dust to Onyx deck? I mean, that deck really got a lot of Black people and people of color very excited, because finally, oh my God, here's this beautiful melanated tarot deck, and it's about time. And so a lot of readers really fell in love with that deck and started using it. So for marketing, you're not just marketing for the audience, you're marketing for the readers. And the readers, it is no longer a bunch of 40-year-old white women. It is very, very different.
I think that's a big part of it, is that the market as a whole and the people who are not only receiving tarot readings, but who are also tarot readers. I mean, that has grown and it's evolved so much. And I think for me, the whole message is that there is not one way to interpret or understand tarot. Tarot in and of itself is diverse, and it should reflect and capture the people who are working with it and creating it. And so that's what I wanted to do. So my point in making the Uncommon Tarot was not to make a point about diversity or to say like, these are the types of people we need to see. It was more of saying, here is one vision of what this can look like. And if you can be fluid enough and playful enough and curious enough, you can imagine these images in lots of different ways. And and I think that also the deck that I created works very much for the way that I personally work with tarot. I'm a very intuitive reader. I'm a very visual reader. And so sometimes I will look at an image and say, wow, this person is blonde. And so, that might be the thing that does stick out to me. And so that then becomes part of the message. But sometimes I'm not looking at the actual person at all. Sometimes it's the color in the image, or it's some sort of background piece in the image. It really is looking at all the layers and the levels of symbolism that are in the cards and finding all of the nuances that come together. That's why I think doing a reading is a different experience than just looking at an image and saying, what does this mean?
So I want to get into a little bit of the collaborative aspect of what y'all have made here. And historically, we've referenced the Rider-Waite-Smith deck. And for anybody who's not familiar with the history of that, it was a collaboration between Arthur Edward Waite and Pamela Coleman Smith. The writer in that was the original UK publisher. And for years and years, it was known simply as the Rider deck. Finally, at least one of the artists got some recognition, Arthur Edward Waite. It became the Rider-Waite deck, and it's only probably in the past 20 years, maybe even 15 years, that has picked up steam as the Rider-Waite-Smith deck, finally giving Pamela Coleman Smith her due. And I mean, on her end, as the artist who was interpreting Waite's instruction, a lot of it fell on her. And I think what a lot of people, well, maybe not a lot of people who are listening to this particularly, who have some background in the tarot, but certainly generally speaking, I don't think a lot of people understand that most of the minor arcana was illustrated by Pamela Coleman Smith without instruction from Arthur Edward Waite. So it really was a monumentally creative endeavor on her part, kind of initiated on her end to do that, but without kind of Waite tapping her as artist. I'm not sure that would have happened either. It might not have happened on her end as a natural thing. So regarding, and then you move on a little bit further in the 20th century, you've got Aleister Crowley and Lady Frida Harris, who collaborated on the Thoth Tarot. So those are absolutely the two most popular tarot decks out there: the Thoth Tarot and the Rider-Waite-Smith deck. Is there something to collaboration between a man and a woman on a deck on a tarot deck that is actually beneficial? I mean, obviously it seems so from a sales standpoint, but I'm wondering on the creative end of things, how does that work? How do you see that collaborative? How important is that a mix of the sexes? How important is that in your collaboration?
Well, I don't know if it specifically has to do with the mix of sexes, or male or female. And I would say in a lot of ways, Theresa, your energy is probably more masculine and mine's more feminine. And that, I mean, I know that I don't mean that in a negative way at all. But I do think that there's something to people who are very analytical versus very intuitive or abstract or creative. And so I think one of the things that works really well for Theresa and I is that, Teresa's a very, you're a very practical,
Mhm.
very, like, you have this sense of like bringing things together and understanding just how to create that structure. Whereas, I'm like just this Aquarian energy that is generating and vibing and creating. And so it works really well to have someone who kind of helps bring some structure to the fluidity. And I think for me, that's where I see the collaborative effort being really magical and having a lot of, that it makes it very dynamic from that standpoint. But I don't know, Teresa, what do you think about that?
Oh my God, I totally agree with what you're saying, a million percent on this. And I think it's also interesting that the females were the ones who illustrated those decks, while the
Hmm.
dudes were back there doing the writing. And I am very masculine. I mean, don't get me wrong, I'm plenty girly on certain things. I love my
Right.
lips. I love my lipstick more than anything. I'm a lipstick addict. But I'm very masculine in my approach to a lot of things. I'm very down to earth. I'm very grounded. I'm very much about, even when I read, I'm very intuitive, but I always function like a detective. I'm looking for just the facts, ma'am. How does this go together? So I have that perspective in everything that I do. And it is extremely, if you want to put a word on it, I guess masculine is the word, and I don't care. I'll own that. But it comes down to the energy. How do people work together? Now, if you have two people who are very dry, um, and very practical and very pragmatic. In my opinion, the tarot deck is probably going to be very dry,
Hmm.
boring. If you've ever worked with a reader like that, I'm going to tell you those are not the readings I like. I love people who have that really beautiful, intuitive, flowy energy because it complements my energy.
Yeah.
It brings something that's going to really help it feel full and rich. If you have two people who are very like super fluid and, oh my god, we're all into this zone, this groovy zone, well, the
Yeah.
problem with that then it doesn't get done. You know, I was married.
Right.
My first husband was a Gemini. Two Geminis in the household, not good. It's like having four people in the house. You need
Yeah.
something to balance it. So if you are somebody who's super creative, super intuitive, super fluid, yeah, you need someone who's going to bring the structure. And if you are into structure, well, you need someone who's going to bring all that beauty, all that magic, or it is just so dry.
I think that one of the great things about working together, working with you, Teresa, is that it really allows both of us to be in our strengths. I think
Yes.
in some collaborations, there's a feeling of like, I'm not good at that, and I need to be good at it because this other person's good at it, and I'm not pulling my weight. But I think a true collaboration really happens when one person is very understanding of what they're good at, what their strengths are, and they can just do it, and the other person is doing the same thing, but they're on the same page with what they're doing or what they're working toward. And I think, working with you, Teresa, that's very much how it always is. Um, and so I love that.
Yes, I love working with you, Shaheen, because you really, I mean, you just bring so much, everything you do, it has so much spirit. It's so creative. I mean, in my opinion, I think you're a creative genius. And I love being in the
Thank you.
background, just really helping to like organize it. It's
Yeah.
like, okay, so you can be Elvis and I will be Colonel Tom, who's that guy? Parker Sanders, whatever his name is.
Listen,
I'll
no,
organize it.
we're a duo.
Yes, and
So,
the thing I love playing with is I love playing with words. I love seeing how things go together. Again, when I read tarot, it isn't just the intuitive thing, it's very much like a detective. It's all about, well, how does this go together now? What is the story this is trying to tell? And
mhm.
so again, I mean, it just works really, really well.
And something else that I think is really was really great about this project is that Teresa, you had such a like respect for what I was doing. And so I felt like that very much, like you were really trying to understand the spirit of the deck and what I was creating and how best we can, support that. Um And I think sometimes people try to, I think when collaborations don't work is when people aren't really clear about what their part is that they're playing, or if somebody's trying to bring too much of one thing to the project that's not really necessary, or isn't really clarifying the vision. And working with you, there's just always such a clarity, and it just feels so fluid. So
Well, I think also, a really important thing with collaborations is that there has to also be a balance and there has to be a lot of respect. Now, I've been in collaborations for other things before where maybe one person, I mean, if you've got one person who's trying to dominate things, that's going to be a problem. If you're in a collaboration with someone who's flaking off and not doing their part, that's a problem. A collaboration has to come from a place of mutual respect.
mhm,
And that means really understand that we are here to make something wonderful. We are here to be of service. And we've got to show up, we've got to do our roles, and we've got to make sure we are being ultimately respectful of our audience and what we want to deliver to them, but respectful to the working relationship.
mhm.
And that means, again, you show up and you do your part and you don't try to take over. I mean, I would never try to tell an artist, hey, this is what you should be doing. That's not my role. My role is to sit back and say, now do it, now do it, now do it. And let's see this. And let's see what words are coming from this. Let's see how this is all, again, going together. And that's the beauty of collaboration. That's how you have to work.
Yeah. And something else that I feel is so helpful in collaborating is that as an artist specifically, I mean, you never really feel like something's finished. I mean, I could probably rework this deck until the end of time. But when you collaborate with someone and when you're publishing something, there are phases and there are steps. And I think that is such a helpful thing. And the same thing with writing. I mean, when you are a writer, one of the great things is having an editor that you can use as a sounding board instead of, I mean, you could literally write about something until the end of time, but there has to be like a finishing point when you're working on an actual project. And I think collaborating really helps facilitate that. And so that's something I really love as well, knowing that there are actual steps to completing something versus just being this nebulous thing that just goes on and on.
Well,
Well,
we're
we
here.
are. Oh, sorry. I was just going to say we're in a collaboration also with the publisher, and one of the things I love is that publishers give you a deadline. Now you got to get
Yeah,
crack. You got to get cracking.
I was gonna
yeah,
say
same.
there's mean people on our end who say put down the pen, put down the brush, you're done, let's go.
And that's so helpful.
Oh,
And
sure.
And I think, but I don't think that people always understand that side of things from the
Mhm,
outside looking in. And I know, Teresa, a lot of the people that we talk to and a lot of the questions we have is how do you become a writer? How do you become an artist? How do you get published?
mhm,
And so I think these are the kind of things that are important to understand, that collaborative effort is essential. And it's part
mhm.
of the magic that makes it happen. It's not holding you back.
So one of the things that I was doing during this conversation was flipping up different parts of the card. I mean, Teresa, you were talking about dry authors producing dry decks, leading to
Mhm.
dry readings by dry readers. And one of the things that really struck me about the Uncommon Tarot is how warm it is.
Yes.
If there's an opposite of dry, it's definitely this particular deck here. And while I certainly appreciate the love fest y'all have going on here as collaborators, there must have been times when things were not working out quite as well as they could have. How did you end up dealing with that? How did you work through that?
Well, first of all, I will say that there actually has not been a time with Shaheen where we were not able to work together well. This was one collaboration that was so easy for me. It was like working together with a long lost, like sibling,
Mhm.
and you found each other and you're just happy to work together and we communicate really well. So I have not had, and I mean I'm speaking for myself, I never felt like, oh my God, this is terrible, or oh, not in any of the things we've collaborated on have I ever had one of those moments. And I've had that with other people that I've collaborated on. where I've worked on maybe a project or a class or something, and it has been knocking heads. It's been difficult. It's been an uphill climb, and I'm just glad it's done and it's over and I don't have to deal with this person again. I've had that, but
Mhm.
I've never had that with Shaheen. I mean, it was just right from the jump. Everything that we've done together, it's just been natural, and that's made it a joy. So I'm just speaking for myself. Shaheen, you may have a different opinion.
No, I don't. And one of the things I'll say that I think is very different working together, because I have had that experience as well with people where I'm like, oh my gosh, I want this to be over. And I think what happens when you and I work together, and in other collaborations that I've done that are successful, is that there is a strong there's a strong intention. We're working toward the same thing. It's not about I have this mission and I need to get this done, and how can you help me with it, or vice versa. It's like, no, this is the thing we're creating together. And so what do we need to do to bring it to life, to support it, to make it the best thing possible? And so I think that in some ways, um, you you're able to take yourself out of the situation. And I think for both of us in collaborating, we're able to kind of take our own personal like ego out of the
Mhm.
situation and say, this, we're creating this, like, what do we need to do to make the Uncommon Tarot successful or completed or finished? And the other thing is, Teresa and I are really good at communicating, and I feel like we're very fluid about things. And if there's something that I don't understand, or that I am thinking or feeling, or an idea that I have, I just will throw it out there, and vice versa. And I think that is also really helpful. If you're doing something in a collaborative way, and you have your own ideas or opinions about something, and every time you're communicating with that other person, you're just trying to convince them to do things the way you want to,
Yes.
then it's not a collaboration. And that's where I think things start to fall apart. um, and I will say, I like you said, Teresa, I've worked in collaborations that have felt that way. And in fact, I would say that I don't like to collaborate with people um, very often, but you're someone that I work really well with. And um, and Weiser, I mean,
Yep.
just as a whole, um, has been so great to work with, and my editor has been really wonderful to work with. But I think it comes down to really communicating effectively, not being afraid to ask questions or approach things where you feel like there might be some confusion, or maybe something could be done better. And really knowing, what are you working toward?
Yep.
Is it that you're trying to do something for yourself, or are you trying to create this project together? So
The other thing I will add too is that, we have a friendship outside of our working relationship.
yeah.
And there are times where I will reach out to Shaheen if I'm dealing with something in my life that's very stressful, and I ask for support. And that also creates, like, I think, a bond that I know that he's somebody I can turn to if something in my life right now is not going really well. And so that also creates, there's this emotional connection that I feel safe with Shaheen. And when you feel safe with somebody on an emotional level, it also makes it much easier to work with that person.
And something that I keep thinking about as you're talking about that, Teresa, is how we collaborate with people all the time as tarot card readers.
Yes.
And so I think that in a lot of ways, collaborating together, we sort of bring that wisdom and that knowledge and that experience to the table. Because when you're doing a tarot card reading, it's not about you being an amazing reader, it's about you giving an amazing reading to the person. And
Yep.
so that's what you're there to create. Just like, if you're doing a project together, it's about the project, not about the individual.
All right, so both of you are tarot card readers. Have you done readings for each other?
Yeah.
Yeah, Shaheen did a wonderful tea reading for me that was so fascinating. I never had a tea reading before, and so I'm like, "Oh, I'm game.
Yeah.
Do a tea leaf reading." And it was so insightful and so helpful. So, yes.
Yeah, yeah, and I remember when we were at Reader's Studio, we were partners a couple of times on some of the activities. So yeah, we've read for each other, but I mean, it's not like a regular thing. But I don't know why that is necessarily.
Because you can read your own cards.
I know, but it's like maybe I need the tarot lady to tell me. No, but I think that's a big part of it though. You know, like everything's tarot for us.
Right,
So
right. All tarot
24/7.
all the time.
yeah.
All right. So the mechanics of a collaboration like this. Before we started recording this, I found out that y'all live about 10 hours apart from each other. It's not like you're knocking on each other's door, especially nowadays. But back when this deck was being created, it was pre-COVID times, so there was an opportunity. How often did you meet in person? How much of this was via email, and was Zoom even a thing? Were you actually doing these face-to-face online meetings at all prior to the pandemic?
Yeah, we did an initial meeting because I wanted to interview him. I wanted to interview the deck. I wanted to see what is the heart behind this deck. And I am very much, now this will sound weird unless you're a tarot person. I'm an energy reader. So one of the things that I'm really good at is really feeling, maybe empath is a better word, the energy behind things. And
Mhm.
so for me, if I'm going to create with somebody, I want to look at your face, I want to get a feel, and not just the theme song for the deck. I also want to get the
Yeah.
feel. And so we met and we had our initial, little discussion, and then everything else was via email. So I think we maybe met two more times, maybe. I don't remember. But I know there was that initial Zoom thing.
Yeah, we and I will say that when we meet and talk about projects, usually we will Zoom.
Yes.
But yeah, so I think initially we had a video call, and then we use the magic of the internet, which is wonderful that we can email and we can have a Dropbox where we can share images. Um, and I think that when we did Tarot for Troubled Times, the book tour, I actually had a demo copy of
Hmm.
the Uncommon Tarot that I brought with me so that you could see it and look at it in person, because I
Yep.
had created a demo for myself to actually use in my sessions with my clients, so I could see how do the cards work in real time. So but yeah, I think a lot of it just happened through video call and then just email and kind of going back and forth. And
But
that is also just, I think, again, a way that we incorporate our background as a reader, because
Hmm.
I think we both read for people over the phone mostly.
Yes.
So
Can you imagine though? Just think about this for a minute now. We're talking about how we met on Zoom and we're doing all this stuff over the internet. Can you imagine what it was like back in the day when Waite and
I
Smith were working together? I mean, he probably had to write a letter. Dear,
I think about this all the time, and I do, and I always think like, are there, and maybe there are, and I just don't know this, but like, are there notes somewhere that
yes.
he,
there's got to be.
like, yeah, like, was it a letter? Did she send sketches to him, and he like wrote on the sketch? Like, how did that happen? Yeah, and it feels like that would be so much more official and so much just harder. You really gotta, because if you think about like writing a letter, like you really have to be
Mhm.
committed to what you're saying. I mean, you could shoot off an email and say, oh, I forgot to add this in there, or
I think
last
Mary
minute.
Greer wrote the book. She wrote a book all about their collaboration. I'm pretty sure she did. So I'll have to go
Yeah,
look that up. But I think she wrote something about how they work together. So there
i
is
would
something
love
out there about it.
I would love to check that out more, because yeah, I think that's a really interesting point, is like, what did that look like then versus now?
And you got to wonder, did Wait yell at her? Did she fight back? Did she like say, no, this is how they, I mean, you got to wonder what it was like for those two to work together on this deck. I think it's a fascinating thing to think about.
And I will also say, it was a very different experience doing this deck and doing the guidebook with you versus like for the Lunar Nomad Oracle, where I created the artwork and I wrote the guidebook.
Mhm.
And the guidebook for that deck was a little bit more in depth. But I can say doing both of those, like doing the Lunar Nomad Oracle, even that process, it was like there was the artwork and then there was the writing part. And the writing part came after the artwork. And I felt like the images themselves evolved as I looked at
Mhm.
them to write about them versus just creating them. So um, it's interesting. I'm
But
fascinated by the creative process. So
I know
Me
that
too.
there was there is correspondence between Crowley and Harris that has been archived, and I know that some of it is pretty hilarious because they're arguing very politely in letters back and forth, and basically if it was a face to face, it would be like, no, I'm not doing this. Oh yeah, you are, because this is my deck. No, and it's just it's kind of fun. So if you ever dig up any of that, that could be a fun thing. um,
yeah.
but okay, the speaking of the creative process, you had asked. I know previously you had mentioned people asking you, "How do you do what you do?" And I mean, I've sat in front of Photoshop and played around with layers, and I know some basics. And then I take a look at your work and Shaheen, your work, and just am okay, that is so far beyond what I could ever accomplish, with the skills that I have. And I don't quite realize it. I don't quite realize it until I'm sitting in front of a computer and saying, how did he do this? How can I make this happen in some kind of way, shape, or form? And Theresa, the same on the writing end. I mean, everybody's got a book inside them. I should write a book about this, but actually doing it, I don't know how many times I've sat in front of a blank word screen, with my fingers above the keyboard saying, hmm, how do I start this? Uh, I know that the creative process is a large thing, but Shaheen, you're dealing with visual images, and Theresa, you're dealing with words. So how did each of you get to the point where you are now published artists in your respective fields?
Well, for me, creating artwork, when I'm sitting down to create something, it very much is a spontaneous process. I kind of I just I let it flow, and sometimes I'll rework things. If I'm working on say I'm taking one card and I'm working on that image and I'm conceptualizing around it. Sometimes it'll go in a different direction than what I initially thought. Sometimes I'll scrap things, and my background is in design. That's what I studied in school. And so I guess I learned how to be in that creative process without being too attached to what I think it should be before it becomes whatever it needs to become. Um, and so I think even the mechanics of how I work, it very much is about just like playing and exploring and seeing what happens. And so translating that into being published, I mean, I created artwork and then I decided I need to give this to the world somehow. And so I went through the process of submitting work to publishers, and Weiser became my publishing home, thankfully. But what I will say that's so interesting for me as a creative is that once you create something, um, it's like your creative ability and your vision just continues to expand. So it's not like you start to do things, or for me it's not like I start to do things just by rote, like it's just the same thing over and over again. It's like, oh, I can do this now. What are the possibilities next? And I think that's the magic of working with like the computer, for example,
Mhm.
because there's like all of these endless possibilities in something like Photoshop or Illustrator that you don't even know what the limits are, because there's always something new to learn. Um, so yeah, for me it's really about just playing and experimenting and just like putting stuff out there. I don't know, I love to do something and see what comes next. So
Got it.
And for me, I'm not as spontaneous. I'm all about discipline. And the way I You see, we do have a different way. Don't get me wrong. I'm very intuitive. I'm very empathic.
No, this is great. I love hearing the
But
differences.
the whole thing that got me on writing was actually starting blogging. And I started blogging because, I thought, well, this might be a good way to share some information. It might be a good way to get people to my website, from a business perspective. So many years ago, I started blogging. And I realized that you just don't put out a blog post once a year. You have to be disciplined. You have to think about, what the hell am I going to say? And how can I be saying enough things that I get more people coming to the site? So in the beginning, my writing career just began with blogging. And I got very, very disciplined with blogging. I mean, like super disciplined. So I got very disciplined with my newsletters, and I created these deadlines for myself. And so I kind of became my own phony little publisher where it's like, okay, this is your deadline. This is when you're going to get things done. This is your marketing calendar. This is when things need to get done. So you need to come up with a creative idea and you need to get to work. And that is how my whole process began. So I blogged for many years before I started writing books. And when I got my first book deal for the tarot coloring book, I'm like, oh my God, now I'm writing a book. What am I going to do? It's a book. This is scary. And then I had to talk myself out of the fear and say, no, wait a minute. You're blogging and writing hours a week and you're super hyper disciplined. Just sit down and do your job. Just like Stephen Pressfield says, do the work. And so, with any time when I write a book, what I do is I sketch out the outline and the idea, and then I just have my writing time during the day and I just get to work. And I work at it very much like I don't know if I want to say a craftsperson, whatever, I just sit down and I do the work. And then once I have gone through my rough draft, then we come back and we redo the whole thing. And then I get other eyes on it. I get another opinion just to see, does this sound good? Does this make sense? And then from there, then we work on it again. So it's like a job. For me, writing is my job. And so for my job, you show up and do your job. There's none of, I don't get to be spontaneous, Shaheen. I mean, sometimes I'm spontaneous. Sometimes like, oh my God, I got an idea. I've got to do this. I got to put this out there. But most of the time it's like, this is the day you write. This is what you're writing about. Maybe you're going to put in a new idea if a spontaneous thing comes up. But everything is very much about, it's discipline. There's a method. I have a structure for the way I do things. And, that's allowed me to be very prolific. I've published 4 books, plus I've done uh, the collaboration on your deck in the last couple of years. So I've gotten a lot done and there's more to come.
Yeah.
I got a
And
lot of ideas.
well, and something that I will say that I don't always think about, but is definitely a part of my creative process in creating a deck, is there's a structure based on just what I'm creating. So I know that, like for the Uncommon Tarot, it was like, I want to create a tarot deck and there are 78 cards. So that was my structure. And I think that for me is really helpful. But unlike you, if I said, okay, I have 2 hours a day to be creative and work on artwork, I would be so anxious about what I'm going to do in that 2 hours versus if I can say to myself, okay, I don't really know what I'm going to accomplish in these next 4 days, but I know these next 4 days are going to be for creativity. I might sit at the table, where I'm doing my artwork for the next like 15 hours and just like make stuff. And then, so it comes in these like waves, and it is very spontaneous for me.
That cracks me up because here's what happens when the tarot lady has time off. My so-called time off. When I have time off, we're like, oh God, good, I'm going to have 3 days off and I'm going to use all this time to be creative. You know what ends up happening? I'm on Amazon, I'm reading CNN, I'm sitting there texting my sister, I'm like going out to buy a new iPhone, I'm fiddling around with all this backdrop coding on my website, and suddenly the creative stuff is sitting there saying, what are you doing? And it seems like when I have a
I'm
deadline,
the opposite.
I know it's weird, but if I have a deadline, if I have a window where something has to get done that has to be creative, well, now I'm going to stop fiddling around. I'm going to get to work. If I have too much time on my hands, and I just said this to my husband the other day, I'm like, oh my God, I'm too busy again. And I'm like, what have I done? I had all this time off. And I mean, it doesn't work for me. I will waste time. I will fiddle around with a whole bunch of garbage I shouldn't be doing. and none of that beautiful, creative, juicy energy gets done. So I have to put my creativity on a calendar, because that is what's going to help me then say, it's creative time now. No more get off Amazon. You don't need to be on Amazon. Knock it off. Don't be bothering Shaheen right now. Get to work. So I have to do the opposite. That's so funny.
Yeah, and that's why we work together so well.
That is really great hearing the two different styles. It's really amazing. You put I put creativity in a box. It's creativity, and there's stuff outside the box, but definitely creativity is a box. Um, as sad as that may sound, I know that creativity spills over into various and sundry bits of life, but as far as creativity goes, working on my end with something I like doing, like woodworking or playing around with watches or something like that. It's definitely like time to do this and time to pay attention to other things. But so getting back to tarot decks, I mean, when we did the Uncommon Tarot, you come to us with kind of the publisher creator end of things. You come to us with art, you come to us with a manuscript, and we all know what tarot decks look like and stuff like that, but specific to the Uncommon Tarot, we've got this box with this magnetic closure, we've got this ribbon pull out. How much input do you, I know the answer to this, but for listeners out there, how much input do you have to the design and packaging process versus how much of that is dictated by the publisher?
So I don't know if this is the same for every deck creator, but I know for myself personally, I am really involved in that process. And my editor Catherine, she and I have a lot. In every project we work with, we have lots of conversations. But for the Uncommon Tarot specifically, we had so many conversations about the packaging and the mechanics of it, So that beautiful magnetic closure and the way that it opened. We talked a lot about the printing techniques that were going to be used, the fact that it was going to be metallic. And then we worked together to create the packaging artwork and what that would look like. And really, the thing with a deck that's so interesting is you have to think about all of the facets. I mean, it's a very three-dimensional thing. And so there were lots of conversations about that process. And the edge painting is so beautiful. That's something that I have heard from so many people saying that the silver edges are some of the most beautiful edge painting that they've ever seen, which makes me so happy. So yeah, but those were all little details that we talked about. And my editor, Catherine, she knew more about what was possible, obviously, from a production standpoint, and was able to say, these are some of the options. This is what we're thinking, and kind of let me be a part of that process. So,
And I did not have any say in that, so I was delighted. I was delighted and I'm speaking as someone who works with tarot. When I got the deck in my hands, I'm like, oh my God, it's in a box. It's in a sturdy box. It's got a magnetic closure. And when you open it up, there's that little statement on the inside and the silver edge. I'm a sucker for gilded edges. So, I mean, the deck right away, all of those things are things that are important to a tarot reader. And even though I didn't have the input on that part, I will say for any publisher, if you make a sturdy box, if you put a ribbon in it to make the deck easy to come out, if you make the inside beautiful, if you make the edges gilded, if you put all those little touches, tarot readers who are professionals or collectors, we love that. We will spend a lot of money for that deck. We don't care.
yeah.
We do not care if it costs an arm and a leg. We want a beautiful, thoughtfully designed deck that feels good in your hands, that's not too big, that shuffles well in a keepsake box. That is what tarot readers want. And of course, we want our inclusivity too. When you do that, when you check all those boxes in that deck, checked every box. That's why a lot of my friends who are also professional readers really love the deck. It's every box was checked. So even though I didn't have input, on that part, I will just say every box got checked.
You got it.
Everything I would have wanted was in that deck. That's all the stuff I would have said. Gilded edges, sturdy box, magnetic closure. You put a ribbon in
all,
there, make it
all the
pretty.
things.
Everything got checked.
And I will say it's always so interesting to work on those kind of things, like the whole package. And you're doing all of that digitally as well. So I didn't see anything physical until I was sent a copy of the deck. So and that's always, and that's I guess my background being in design, I understand that process as well, the production process, and how to look at mock-ups, and the flat lay of the actual box that they have to cut up and then put it three-dimensionally, like all that kind of stuff, where some people might look at that and be like, what the heck is this? um so yeah, I mean, and I think that I love being a part of that process, but I'm sure not everybody is interested in that or would even want to have say in it. Like you were saying, Teresa, like, oh, I'm glad that it turned out beautiful and I didn't have to do anything.
Yeah.
Yes, that's wonderful feeling.
I mean, so a couple things on our end. First off, you really lucked out with Catherine Skypeck as the editor on this, because she's not only a top-notch editor, she's also the person who designed, the stuff that's the non-artistic stuff, the actual design of the box, kind of the layout of the cards, the book cover, the book interior, all that was designed by Catherine, and because of her background, she's got kind of a unique perspective on it. So it does become more a collaboration between the artist and author, and the editor and package designer than I think most companies or most situations would demand. On my end, it's always a battle between me and sales. Sales is kind of the bean counters. We love our salespeople, but they're the ones that are always demanding a lower price on a deck, and pretty much I know, right? So pretty much they are the people who are saying, we want it at this price, and then I'm the mean guy that says, well, we can't do a ribbon or we can't do this at that price, so we'll need to cut that. I will say that one of the challenges on this particular deck is the metallized paper used in the background on the box wrap. It's very difficult to get a decent proof of that. So at some point, even on our end as professionals who have at least a little bit of experience with this, it's kind of a punt. And in this case, it really came out really nice. We were actually, I hate to say it, but we were very surprised how nice it came out. So that was a good thing. On our end, when we're working with tarot artists, the one piece of advice I would give on my end more than any other is work your art to a tarot card ratio. You've got a deck of tarot cards. If you're making tarot cards, you've got a deck of tarot cards hanging around. Take a ruler, measure them out, and make sure your artwork is in that ratio, so none of it has to be cut or scaled disproportionately to actually fit a standard card size. And Shaheen, I don't think that was an issue on your end. I think this is a fairly standard card size, but very often I'll make adjustments on the card size to fit an artist's proportions rather than the other way around. And it's always much easier, much more cost effective to deal with a standard card size. So for you tarot artists out there, that's something to think of. So on your end as both writer and artist, what advice would you give to others who, I mean, you get these questions all the time. What advice do you give to others about producing their own tarot decks or approaching publishers to publish things?
Well, my advice always is to do it. I mean, if you if you want to create something, create it and send it to people. I think a lot of times when I'm talking to other people who are interested in, being a deck creator or a writer, or being published in any kind of way, the challenge always is, have you actually created something? And if you have created something, do you now feel confident enough to share it with publishers? Because That's the only way that it's going to be published. And I also, my other piece of advice that I often will give to people is to also think about what the audience or the people who are receiving this, how they're going to respond and interact with the product that you're creating or the artwork or the writing that you're doing, because it isn't just your experience with it. And I think that's always, for artists especially, I think that can be a shocking thing, is that once you create a piece of artwork and you send it to a publisher, especially if they say yes and they're going to publish it, things about that could need to be changed, or people might receive it in a way that's different than what you intended, and you have to be okay with that.
And my advice is be a pro. You cannot send in something really sloppy. You cannot do a half-ass job when you are approaching a publisher, or even when you're doing your own deck. If you're self-publishing, don't be half-assed. Be a professional. Deliver what you promise. If you're approaching a publisher, you don't want to just say, well, here's my art. This is such a great idea. Why is it a great idea? Who's going to buy this? What is going to be the marketing behind this? And now here's my this is my business perspective. How are you going to market it? You, the artist, the writer. What is going to be your role? How do you know there's an audience for this? Have you done research on that? So you've got to be a pro, and that means you do your research. You also understand all the parts about the selling of your book, your deck, and your idea. So when you approach the publisher, you're not coming at it just saying, well, here I am, look how fabulous my idea is. It's like, here's why this idea is amazing. And this is what we need to do with it. And here's an example of my work, and it's polished and it's well done. If you can come at your publisher like that, even if they reject you, at least you feel like you gave it your A game. And if you are going to be self-publishing your own deck, one of the things that makes me the maddest is when people say, well, we're going to deliver, and then suddenly they drop off the face of the earth. They're making excuses. And don't do that. Be a pro. Whether you're going with a publisher, whether you are self-publishing, be a pro, because that is going to make people, first of all, feel confident wanting to work with you, or confident buying from you. If you are self-publishing, just be a pro.
I'm going to second that and say, listen to what Theresa just said. Very much appreciated on the publishing end of things. All right, so we've blasted way over an hour, and I'm really happy that we have, because it's been just so delightful talking to both of you. Shaheen, if people want to learn more about your work and your goings on, where do they go online to find information about Shaheen Miro?
You can find me at my website, which is shaheenmiroinsights.com. And you can also find me on Instagram. My handle is Shaheen the Dream. And those are the two of the best places to connect with me. I love hearing from people. So find me, email me, talk to me.
Perfect. Theresa, where can people reach out to you? How do they find you online?
They can find me at my website, thetarotlady.com, and I'm on Instagram also. I'm very active there as the Tarot Lady. I do a morning forecast every single day. You can join me live for that over on Instagram. And I'm also on Twitter, which is actually my favorite platform, as the Tarot Lady. So those are the best places to find me.
Okay, perfect. Shaheen and Theresa, it's just been marvelous having you on the Weiser Books Radio Hour. I really appreciate you spending time with us.
Thank you for having us.
Thank you so much. Great to see you both.
Yeah.
You've been listening to the Weiser Books Radio Hour. Find us online at www.weiserbooks.com. And for listeners who made it this far, special unannounced giveaway, contact me directly. I'm at mconlon, MCONLON, at rwwbooks.com. And first 5 people that get in touch with me will get a free deck. Thank you very much.